If you're watching gun media on YouTube, you'll no doubt know that last week SIG made a post on social media proclaiming that it ended today, talking about the P320 and the issues that it's facing. And the reason you know this is because that almost everybody made a video about that occurrence and posted it on the internet. And I'm certainly not gonna step in and try and defend or apologize for the P320. I was working on this piece already and just decided to send it anyway, because there are over 4 million P320s in circulation. 4 million. And where the P320 is at in this development, the ecosystem is very mature and robust. So, I mean, the question comes up, can it hang with the mighty 2011 in pistol competitions? So I look to answer it in this video. And the P320 is very similar to a hammer-fired gun because it is based off a hammer-fired gun. It is based off the P250, which had an internal hammer, and as a result, it has the very high bore axis that a hammer would require. So ultimately, the bore axis of the P320 is very similar to a 2011. So how the gun flips and recoils in hand can be similar if they're similarly sprung and have similar weights to a 2011. So why not see if we can get that kind of performance? And as for you fans, yes, there is a dad joke in this video. You're going to have to look for it amongst all the SIG maxing going on. And while we're at it, if you don't already, follow me on X. That's probably where gun content's going to end up eventually. You can see me over there at this account. You can catch me on Rumble as well, or if you're just old-fashioned, hit the subscribe button and follow me on YouTube. But before we can get here, the journey starts with the simple fire control unit. The P320 is a chassis and the fire control unit is the heart of it. Now, I know you know this, but for my manual reviewer who's going to be watching this video, that is the actual gun, the fire control unit. All this other stuff that's kind of bolted on around the gun is not the gun, despite looking like the gun. And the price of that little fire control unit is about $350. That's just for educational purposes. I'm not promoting or anything silly like that. Now, out of the box, the P320 trigger is incredibly mid. The ergonomics of the trigger are amazing with how the trigger is kind of situated with the grip and like how you get onto the trigger. It makes it incredibly easy to shoot, but the actual trigger characteristics itself, not amazing. In one of my previous videos, I described it as taking 2 carrot sticks and like pressing them into each other until one snaps, and I still think that that's the most accurate description of what a P320 trigger is like. But there are dudes out there like Isaac Lockwood and Max Michel who are tearing up matches with that P320 trigger, so you can still do great things on it, even if it is not as awe-inspiring as the mighty 2011 trigger. I don't know if I introduced that. That's my Bull Armory Air. It's the gun I'll be competing with in limited optics this year, so that's what this is. I'm just gonna call it 2011 because it takes too long to say. But that little FCU isn't capable of doing anything cool by itself. It needs the help of a slide and grip. So for an additional $500, the Gray Guns Laser Etch TXG grip is available, and the 4.7-inch modern classic gunsmith fit upper assembly is available. And if you wanted to improve that carrot stick trigger, the Gray Guns kit is available for some cuss words and about $160. The original OEM P320 trigger pull looked like this, and the Gray Guns kit brought down the over travel by about 30%. So overall, the length of throw is something that you consider for speed shooting. The length of reset similarly is something that you are interested in if you're trying to do performance shooting. The Gray Guns kit went a long way towards closing the gap towards my Bull Armory gun here. However, the Bull Armory trigger is roughly 30% shorter than the Gray Guns kit. It's about 50% shorter than an OEM P320. So the mighty sliding trigger of the 2011 is still king in the pistol space. So the build as we have it right here is sitting at about $1,970, which is still a healthy savings over a kind of competition ready 2011. You're at basically kind of the beginning of the middle tier of 2011s at that price point. But I'm hopeful that this Gray Guns upper is going to make it be competitive competitive with the 2011 based on just the accuracy. And before we get into the shooting, just a little bit of sermonizing, just a little bit more. There is an acceptable floor for how good gear has to be. Ultimately, the capability of the hardware, and I'm not talking about the P320, I'm talking about most gun hardware. The capability of the hardware is much greater than the capability of the shooter's skill. It's true in my case, it's true in your case, it's true in almost everybody who picks up a gun's case. We like to think that through spending more money, we are getting more performance. What usually is happening when you spend more money is you're getting something to kind of change, like how the gun is going to fit in your hand, getting something that is going to work better with your grip. Maybe it's mechanical accuracy, but generally speaking, most shooters can't even maximize the mechanical accuracy from a platform. All of that to say is that you should focus on the nut behind the gun, not necessarily the gun when you're working at trying to get better. Guns are nice, but they don't make you better shooters. As the gun is set up right now, I would say that it is acceptably close to what my 2011 is. The weight is very similar. This is just slightly heavier than my 2011. So we went to the range to check it out. And it was windy. It was super windy. The wind is blowing the gun around in my hands. And I wasn't just comparing the P320 to the 2011, I actually had my SXG P320 X5 there as well. If you're going to compare the super high-end P320s, that is the maximum spec from Sig Sauer. So I wanted to see how this heavy boy would compare to that heavy boy. I got started on some bill drills at 7 yards just to see kind of the raw trigger speed that I could achieve. And ultimately what I found is that for my grip at that distance, I am really capable of holding the gun kind of in the zone with about just under a 20 split with a 2011. With the P320 with the gray guns trigger, it was roughly a 21 or 22, and with the XXG, it was a 22 or 23. Now, those hundredths of a second are not very material in the overall scheme of things if you're trying to score well at a match. What was interesting at the bill drill, it inspired some slow motion recoil comparison, is that the gray gun's grip, which I don't like the shape of, and honestly, it's not the gray gun's fault, it is the TXG module. It has these humps kind of at the back of the beaver tail that kind of throw my hand out wider around the gun, and I don't love that. I like the way the SXG grip is set up, but I noticed that I was getting better results from the tungsten grip module, and in slow motion, you absolutely can see that the steel frame grip module from Sig was having the most turbulence when the gun would close, so that was very interesting. I was really surprised to see that the SXG didn't perform better. It had the best traction in hand thanks to the LOK grips that come on that frame, but ultimately the gun was just moving around more. But if you wanted to check out LOK grips, this might be able to help you. At 15 yards, shooting a practical array of steel, it wasn't a huge difference sort of either way. All the guns kind of performed at 15 yards roughly similarly, and I would probably give the edge to the competition gun that I have the most reps with. I'm most familiar with how these guns move and how the gun sits in my hand to stabilize it. Now backing it up to 25 yards, and I will test the guns with bench rest later on in the video, but this was the beginning of a 3-day windstorm in DFW that ultimately kind of came to a peak of about 30-mile-an-hour sustained winds with 50-mile-an-hour gusts. We were only at the beginning of the windstorm, so it was, sustained winds of about 20 miles an hour with mid-30s on gusts. So the targets were moving around. I wasn't going to try and get extreme accuracy on the range, but I did notice just shooting the guns kind of side by side that I was getting very good accuracy from this gray gun's upper, although the 2011 was still king. And the ammo I was using was my 115 jacketed hollow point competition load, which is about 1150 foot per second out of a 5-inch gun. So it's very much in kind of a range load loading. It's not like particularly slow. It's a little bit snappy, but it makes these heavier slides on these longer slide guns work really well. So I like that setup for the ammo, but I was also shooting my Buffalo Creek 115 range loads for most of the testing. That stuff is super soft shooting out of these style guns, and they are a supporter of the channel, so I thank them for that, and I thank you for this. You can figure out what that does. I just know it. With where we're at, just simply taking it to the range and shooting it, doing a little bit of practicing with the gun, I can say that I absolutely prefer my 2011 simply because it's more familiar and It's just, you know, it's tough to beat. The 2011 is an amazing shooting platform. So I wanted to see if I could make myself like the gun a little bit more, and I remembered that I have my Brouwer Solutions M1811 grip, which has a grip shape exactly like a 1911 and makes the P320 ultimately feel like a 1911. Now this is their polymer grip module, which has the laser etching, and the texture is absolutely brilliant. The only problem is that the P320 is a modular gun that was based around a duty concept. You may not realize is technically the 2011 is similarly modular, where the actual frame is this little bit right here, and the grip and everything that goes in it just bolts onto the frame. Not quite a chassis system for modularity, but you can ultimately configure a 2011 how you want. But a 2011 is set up for competition in mind. It was developed for competition shooting, despite what Staccato would have you think. And as a result, the weights of the gun, if you have a steel frame, which this one is, are much higher. So even with a polymer grip module like you see here with the aluminum magwell, this is about 40 ounces. If I go with the Brouwer Solutions polymer grip on the P320, the weight dropped to about 30 ounces. However, I really like the sculpt of the beaver tail and how it went, so I took it to the indoor range and ran some tests against the 2011 and found that while the gun was a lot snappier than it was in its heavier 45 ounce format, in its 30 ounce format, it still returned to center brilliantly. I was getting roughly similar results to my 2011. I actually really like how the M1811 does in that regard. But if you're gonna be a bear, be a grizzly. Hey, how did the cell phone propose to his girlfriend? He gave her a ring. And while the setup with the Brouwer M1811 was cheaper than the gray gun setup, because this grip module setup, when it's not on sale, and they go on sale somewhat regularly, this with the steel magwell is going to cost about $300 as you see it here. This is the Brouwer M1823 steel grip module that has an amazing hexagon traction, has that same profile of the M1811, but the M1823 weighs over a pound more than the polymer version of the gun. And not only that, it has an aligned tactical magazine release, which is actually my preferred P320 magazine release because it's just easier to get onto the button and it stays out of the way of your grip. It's kind of a nice little offset deal there, very nice. So while the gun setup on the M1811 was about $1769, which is still kind of affording all of the competition steel frame striker guns that are there. You can get the Canik, the Walter, you could have an elevated Prodigy with the good fire controls and all that kind of stuff. You can pretty much afford most of the competition guns at that price point. But when you jump up to the M1823, this setup of the magwell and the frame is about $869. Very, very expensive. The overall build starts to cost right at $2,374. Short of going absolutely crazy on finishes with the M1823, that's about as much money as you can spend on a P320. I guess we could pay Terran to write his name on the pistol and that would make it cost more, but short of that, that's about as much as you can spend. Taking it to the indoor range and checking it out again, I was very pleased with how the gun shot. At this point, the gun weighs about 49.7 ounces before a magazine with the weight of the optic. And while that's a little bit heavier than what I prefer, I tend to like kind of the low 40 ounce range, it still ran brilliantly. I'm a big enough guy where I could swing it around. It wasn't gonna slow me down in the gun manipulation. Side by side with my 2011, I was getting very comparable results, shooting for score and shooting for time. Sitting down and pinning my ears back and aiming with a rest at a sterilized indoor range, I was actually very impressed with the accuracy from the gray gun's upper. It got that particular day better groups than I was able to get out of the 2011. Doesn't mean that this isn't capable of more. It just means based on my terrible vision and what I was able to stabilize, I was able to do better with the gray gun's upper. So at this point, there's not much left but to take it to the match and check it out. Since we're comparing it to a 2011, I shot it in USPSA as a limited optics gun and kept the magwell on the gun. And of course, rather than preparing and practicing stuff like reloads and all that kind of stuff, and since I spent all winter shooting a PCC just for fun, I haven't reloaded a pistol on the clock since last year. Ah, shit. On the first stage, I was a little bit hesitant with the trigger and just kind of kept shooting. I liked what I was feeling, but at the same time, I wasn't quite trusting I was going to be able to deliver it. And sure enough, in the last position, I had trigger freeze on one of the targets. kind of getting used to the platform and used to the gun, I decided I was just going to lean into it in anger and let the chips fall where they may. And sure enough, the gun was beginning to perform, and I was beginning to perform. I liked what I was seeing. We started to get further into the match, closer to the classifier stages, and there was roughly a 5-yard target with a headshot box, and I was able to put the bullets right next to each other in the upper A zone, which is a testament to the accuracy of the gun, but also the grip module and its stability in hand. This Brouwer M1823 is truly, I think, the best grip module for the P320. It just is. Getting into the classifiers, which for those of you who aren't into USPSA, they're standard courses of fire that they have established scores on, and you can kind of rate yourself against what the established scores are. The top rating is 95 to 100%, that's Grandmaster. Then it goes 85 to 95%, that is Master. And then 75 to 85 is A class. And then it goes down from there and so on and so forth. But you know, anything in the Master, Grandmaster range is very good shooting. So the Calm Before the Storm, which is a table start, I went and shot that, only dropped 2 Charlies on it, even though I bobbled a reload. It was good enough for a 90% score, which is a solid Master classifier. I'll take it. That's my best limited optics classifier to date. Granted, I don't have very many of them. The other classifier in this match is called Trigger Freeze, because there are 12 targets that you just basically pin your ears back and race on. And I was able to shoot that in just over 8 seconds. Generally a score in the 7-second range is great, but I dropped 5 Charlies. I had to reload coming into the last position, which cost me a little bit of time because I didn't shake down in practice that I had magazines that would be 23+1. But even with kind of that bobbled reload, I was still able to lay down an 82% classifier, which is a high A classifier. Still very good, although I think if I didn't have to reload, I could have probably landed in that M range. Either way, at that point, I was becoming a believer in what the platform is capable of. And that's kind of a silly thing to say because Mason Lane, Max Michel, Isaac Lockwood, there's a bunch of other dudes who are winning matches with P320s across the country. But at that point, I had a good appreciation for what the gun is capable of. I really like how the gun handles, how it sits in hand. I like the fact that when the gun goes to slide lock, you can reach the slide release. It manipulates very well for a competition style firearm. So do I prefer it to a typical 2011? No, I still like the 2011 better. But what I do really like about the gun is that when you have a modular gun with a very mature ecosystem, you can do a lot of really cool stuff. And the P320, despite kind of what's going on with the cases and stuff like that, has a very mature ecosystem. So I love the fact that the gun is modular and you can set it up however you want to suit whatever your needs might be. Am I sitting here trying to resolve the 320 drama or defend SIG in this case? No, that's outside the scope of this video. I think ultimately the facts are going to win out whatever they may be, and we are in the middle act for what's going to happen with the platform. But as I said at the beginning of the video, there's 4 million of these things in the wild. There are lots of guys who, you know, the 320 is their competition gun and they just want to know what it's capable of. And I think ultimately the gun is capable of competing at the deep end of any of the sport. For transparency, I do want to thank Gray Guns for sending the bits in. OSight sent the sight in, obviously, and I'm checking it out. It did just fine. Previously, the dudes at Brouwer have sent me those grips to check out in other videos. So if you want to see stuff on anything but the OSight, there's videos up for that. If you want to see my review on the Bull Armory Air, then you can watch that here.